You are always the one in charge, the one who never complains, the one who keeps it all inside. But do you ever feel like you're falling apart from the inside? You wake up every morning, put on that invisible armor, and face the world with the same composed expression you've worn for years. Friends call you their rock. Family leans on your strength. Colleagues admire your unshakable calm. But late at night, when the house is quiet and the world stops demanding your strength, do you recognize the person staring back at you in the mirror? What if I told you that the very thing you've been praised for, your unwavering strength, might be the very thing that's slowly erasing who you truly are? This isn't a story about weakness. This is a story about awakening, about the courage it takes to remove a mask you never realized you were wearing. You were taught to be strong, but no one ever asked, strong for whom and for what? Think back to the first time someone told you to toughen up. Maybe you were 7, crying over a scraped knee, and someone said, "Big boys don't cry." Or perhaps you were 12, your heart breaking over a friendship that ended, and you heard, "Don't let them see you're upset." These weren't cruel people. They thought they were protecting you, teaching you resilience, preparing you for a world that doesn't have patience for vulnerability. But Jung understood something profound about this process. He wrote, "The persona is a mask that pretends individuality while reflecting the expectations of society. You began living not as yourself, but as a reflection of what others needed you to be. The reliable one, the strong one, the one who never breaks. And somewhere along the way, you stopped asking what you needed. You stopped checking in with your own heart. The mask became so comfortable, so automatic, that you forgot there was a face underneath it. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to meet the world's expectations. It's necessary, even protective. But when the persona becomes our entire identity, when we forget there's an authentic self beneath it, that's when the quiet breaking begins. Here's a question Jung might ask you. When you're alone, completely alone, what emotions arise that you don't allow yourself to feel in front of others? Write them down. Don't judge them. Just notice them. Because recognizing your hidden emotions is the first step toward reclaiming your authentic self. Let me paint a picture you might recognize. You're the friend who gets the 3 a.m. phone calls when someone's world is falling apart. You're the sibling who handles the family crises while everyone else falls apart. The employee who stays late to fix what others couldn't manage. The partner who says, "I'm fine," even when you're drowning. You've mastered the art of emotional management, not just your own, but everyone else's. When there's chaos, you become the calm center. When there's fear, you become the steady presence. When there's pain, you become the healer. When others are overwhelmed, you become the solution, and you've convinced yourself this is noble. This is love. This is what good people do. This is your purpose, your value, your contribution to the world. But Jung saw through this heroic facade. He understood that when we constantly play the role of the strong one, something insidious happens. We start to lose touch with our own inner world. We become so focused on managing everyone else's emotions that we forget how to access our own. Let me tell you about Sarah. She was 34, a successful nurse, the oldest of 4 siblings. Sarah had been the family's emotional anchor since she was 10 years old, when her parents went through a bitter divorce that tore their household apart. Sarah learned early that when she was calm, others felt safe. When she was strong, chaos settled. When she took charge, problems got solved. She became the family translator, helping her parents communicate without fighting, comforting her younger siblings when they were scared, making sure everyone's needs were met. By high school, Sarah was the friend everyone turned to. Teachers praised her maturity. Guidance counselors said she had a gift for helping others. College professors encouraged her to go into nursing because she was naturally caring. But what Jung would recognize is that Sarah wasn't naturally anything. She had learned, through years of unconscious conditioning, that her safety and belonging depended on being the caretaker. She had developed what psychologists call a compulsive helping pattern. By adulthood, Sarah's entire identity revolved around being needed. She worked double shifts at the hospital, volunteered at a crisis center on weekends, and was the go-to person for every friend's emergency. She had 3 different friends who called her their therapist. Her family still turned to her first for every crisis. People constantly told her how amazing she was, how strong, how selfless. They said things like, "I don't know how you do it," and "You're such a saint," and "I wish I could be more like you." And Sarah felt proud, important, valuable. But something else was happening, something Sarah couldn't name. She started experiencing what she called emotional static, a kind of numbness that would descend during moments that should have been meaningful. Beautiful sunsets looked gray. Her favorite music sounded like noise. Friends' good news felt distant, like she was hearing it through glass. Jung would say Sarah was experiencing what he called the sacrifice of the self. He wrote, "We sacrifice the self for the comfort of the mask, until the mask becomes our prison." You see, when we constantly prioritize others' emotional needs over our own, when we make our worth dependent on how much we can give, we slowly lose contact with who we actually are beneath all that giving. We become strangers to ourselves. This is what Jung called living unconsciously, going through the motions of life without being connected to your deeper self, your real needs, your authentic desires. It's living from the outside in rather than the inside out. The signs are always there if you know where to look. You minimize your own problems while magnifying everyone else's. You feel guilty when you're not actively helping someone. You interpret your need for rest as laziness, your need for support as weakness, your need for care as selfishness. You become so skilled at reading others' emotions that you've forgotten how to read your own. You know exactly what everyone else needs, but you have no idea what you need. I knew a man named David who experienced this differently. David was the family's financial rock, the one who bailed everyone out, who never said no to a loan request, who worked overtime to support not just his own family, but his parents and siblings too. David took pride in being the provider, the solver, the one who could handle anything. But late at night, he would lie awake calculating numbers, feeling a weight in his chest that he couldn't explain. Was successful by every external measure, but he felt like he was suffocating. Both Sarah and David had learned the same unconscious lesson, that their value as human beings was conditional on their usefulness to others. They had what Jung would call an inflated helper complex, an unconscious belief that they were responsible for everyone else's well-being. If this is hitting close to home, I want you to pause for just a moment. Think about this question. When was the last time you did something purely for your own joy, without it somehow serving or helping someone else? Can you even remember? This isn't about judging yourself. It's about recognizing a pattern that might be running your life without your conscious awareness. Because what happens next reveals the hidden cost of this unconscious strength. The price we pay when we mistake emotional numbness for resilience, when we confuse self-abandonment with service to others. Jung understood that everything we ignore about ourselves doesn't disappear. It goes underground. It accumulates, and eventually, It finds a way to surface, usually in ways we don't expect and can't control. The stronger you appear on the outside, the more disconnected you become on the inside. The more you help others process their emotions, the more you lose touch with your own. The more indispensable you become to everyone else, the more you become a stranger to yourself. And that's when the real breaking begins. Not loud and dramatic, but quiet and slow. Like a foundation cracking under weight it was never meant to carry alone. Here's what no one tells you about being the strong one. There comes a moment when you realize you've become completely hollow inside. You think you are strong, but in fact, you are depleted. It doesn't happen all at once. It's more like, imagine a tree that looks magnificent from the outside. Full branches, green leaves, impressive height. People seek shelter under it, admire its strength, depend on its steadiness. But inside, the core has been slowly rotting away. One day, a wind that shouldn't have been strong enough to move it topples it completely. That's what happened to Sarah, and maybe it's happening to you right now. Sarah began to notice she felt nothing during moments that should have moved her. A patient's recovery that would have once filled her with joy now felt like just another task completed. Sunsets that used to take her breath away looked gray and flat. Her favorite music sounded like noise. Friends' good news felt static. She could hear the words, but they didn't reach her. She was going through all the motions of caring, saying all the right things, responding with all the appropriate emotions. But the feeling beneath it had disappeared. It was like watching herself from the outside, performing the role of herself. Then came the unexpected moments of complete breakdown. Crying in the grocery store because they were out of her usual bread. Rage so sudden and intense, it scared her when someone cut her off in traffic. Sobbing uncontrollably while watching a commercial about puppies, not because it was sad, but because she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt anything that deeply. Her body started keeping score too. Chronic headaches that felt like her skull was in a vice. Insomnia that left her staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., mind racing with everyone else's problems, but feeling completely empty about her own life. Back pain that no doctor could explain. The literal weight of carrying everyone else's emotional burdens. The exhaustion was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. Not the tiredness that comes from physical work, but a bone-deep depletion that no amount of sleep could touch. She felt like she was running on empty, but she couldn't stop running because everyone needed her to keep going. Carl Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And that's exactly what was happening. Sarah, and maybe you, had become so expert at avoiding your own inner world that you'd lost the ability to access it. You'd become a professional helper, a career strong person, a full-time supporter of others. But you'd abandoned your own soul in the process. Jung called this shadow work. The parts of ourselves we've rejected or ignored don't disappear. They accumulate in what he termed the shadow. The unconscious repository of everything we've deemed unacceptable about ourselves. For Sarah, the shadow contained decades of accumulated feelings. Her own fear, her own need for comfort, her own desire to be taken care of, her own right to be tired, her own need to be heard and understood. All the parts of herself she'd learned were inconvenient or burdensome. The breaking point came on an ordinary Tuesday. Sarah was at work in room 314, comforting a patient who just received news that her cancer had returned. Sarah was doing what she always did, holding space, offering comfort, being the steady presence in someone else's storm. But suddenly, something shifted as she was saying the words, "You're going to be okay. I'm here with you." She heard them as if from outside herself, And she realized with crystal clarity, she had no idea who she was when she wasn't taking care of someone else. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She excused herself, went to the hospital bathroom, locked the door, and for the first time in decades, asked herself a question she'd never asked. Who am I when I'm not helping someone? The silence that followed was deafening. Not because there was no answer, but because she realized she'd spent so many years being what others needed that she'd completely lost touch with what she needed. Her own dreams, her own fears, her own desires, they were like foreign concepts. This is the shadow side of strength that Jung understood so well. When we make our entire identity about being strong for others, we create an internal split. Part of us, the part that needs care, that feels uncertain, that craves rest, that has its own dreams and desires, gets banished to the unconscious. But the unconscious doesn't stay quiet forever. It finds ways to get our attention. Jung observed, "What you resist persists, and what you accept transforms." Sarah had been resisting her own vulnerability for so long that it had built up like water behind a dam. The exhaustion, the emptiness, the unexpected emotional outbursts, these weren't signs of weakness or mental illness. They were her psyche's desperate attempt to get her attention. Her authentic self, starved of recognition for years, was finally demanding to be seen. The tears, the rage, the emptiness, they were messengers from the parts of herself she'd abandoned. They were saying, "We're still here. We still matter. We still need care." This is what Jung meant by the dark night of the soul, the moment when our constructed identity crumbles and we're forced to confront who we actually are beneath all our roles and masks. If you're experiencing this kind of breaking, the numbness, the unexpected emotions, the sense that you're living someone else's life, Jung would say, you're not having a breakdown. You're having a breakthrough. Your authentic self is trying to emerge from beneath years of unconscious conditioning. Ask yourself right now, what would happen if you stopped being the strong one for just one day? What fears come up when you imagine that? What would people think? How would they react? Those fears will point you toward what you've been avoiding about yourself and what you most need to reclaim. But Sarah's story doesn't end in that bathroom, in that moment of breaking, and neither does yours. Because Jung discovered something beautiful about these dark nights of the soul. They're not the end of your strength. They're not proof that you're weak or broken. They're the beginning of your authenticity. The first step toward becoming who you actually are, rather than who you think you should be. To understand how to heal, we need to understand how we learned to hide in the first place. Every mask has an origin story. Every persona was once a survival strategy. Sarah's journey of self-discovery led her back to a memory she'd buried for decades. She was 8 years old, sitting in her pink bedroom with the butterfly wallpaper, listening to her parents fight downstairs. The voices were getting louder, more vicious. Words like divorce and custody were being thrown around like weapons. Her 3-year-old brother, Tommy, was crying in the next room, scared by the shouting, calling for Mommy. But Mommy was downstairs screaming at Daddy, and Daddy was screaming back. The whole house felt like it was going to explode. Little Sarah made a decision that night that would shape the next 26 years of her life. She went to Tommy's room, picked him up even though he was almost 2, heavy for her 8-year-old arms, and whispered, "It's okay. I'll take care of you. I'll always take care of you." And in that moment, something beautiful and tragic happened simultaneously. Sarah discovered that she had power, the power to make someone feel safe in an unsafe world. But she also learned something that would cost her dearly, that her own fear, her own 8-year-old heart that was also scared and wanted someone to comfort her, Those feelings were inconvenient, burdens, things that got in the way of being helpful. So she buried them, right there. At 8 years old, she made an unconscious bargain. If I am strong, people need me. If I am weak, I'm alone. Jung understood that we all make these unconscious bargains in childhood. He called them archetypal patterns, unconscious templates that shape how we see ourselves and move through the world. We learn what gets us love, attention, safety, and we shape ourselves around those discoveries. For Sarah, the archetype she embodied was what Jung might call the eternal caretaker. Always strong, always giving, always available, never needing anything in return. Maybe your moment was different. Maybe you were the child who learned that being smart got approval, so you buried the parts of you that didn't know the answers. Maybe you learned that being funny kept the peace, so you buried the parts of you that felt sad or serious. Maybe you were the child who learned that achievement earned love, so you buried the parts of you that just wanted to play. Or maybe you learned that being invisible kept you safe, so you buried the parts of you that wanted to be seen and celebrated. Or maybe, like Sarah, you learned that being strong, never complaining, never needing, always giving, was your ticket to belonging. That taking care of others was how you earned your place in the world. Jung wrote, "Whatever is rejected from the self appears in the world as an event." What he meant is that the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge don't disappear. They show up in our lives as external circumstances, patterns we can't break, relationships that drain us, physical symptoms our bodies develop, recurring life themes that follow us everywhere we go. Sarah's exhaustion wasn't just tiredness. It was her rejected need for rest demanding attention. Her emptiness wasn't depression. It was her abandoned, authentic self crying out to be acknowledged. Her sudden emotional overwhelm wasn't weakness. It was decades of unfelt feelings finally breaking through. When Sarah began therapy, she started to see this pattern everywhere in her adult life. She'd chosen nursing, not just because she was good at it, but because it gave her a socially acceptable way to be needed constantly. She'd been drawn to the most emotionally demanding patients because their need matched her compulsive giving. Her apartment told the story too. Every surface was covered with photos of family and friends, artwork she'd received as gifts, mementos from people she'd helped, thank you cards from patients. But nothing reflected her own tastes, her own personality, her own dreams or desires. Even her romantic relationships followed this pattern. She'd been attracted to men who needed fixing, men who were struggling with addiction or depression or family trauma, men who needed a caretaker. She'd never been in a relationship where she was cared for equally. The very idea felt foreign, almost selfish. Jung would say that Sarah's shadow, the unconscious part of herself she'd rejected, contained everything she'd learned was unacceptable. Her need to be taken care of, her desire to rest, her right to have her own problems, her longing to be vulnerable, her wish to be loved, not for what she could do, but for who she was. But Jung believed that these moments of recognition, painful as they are, represent the beginning of what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are, rather than who you think you should be. The goal isn't to abandon the caretaker part of Sarah. It was genuine and valuable. The goal was to make it conscious, to choose it rather than be compulsed by it. For Sarah, this meant learning to ask a question she'd never asked. What do I actually want? Not what should I want? Not what would help others? Not what's the right thing to want? But what did her authentic self, beneath all the giving and helping and strength, actually desire? The answer terrified her. She wanted to rest without feeling guilty. She wanted someone else to make the decisions for once. She wanted to be held without having to earn it through service. She wanted to say, "I don't know," without feeling like she was letting anyone down. She wanted to have problems that someone else would care about solving. She wanted, in other words, to be human, to be allowed the full range of human experience, not just the parts that were convenient for others. If you've been following Sarah's journey and seeing yourself in her story, let me ask you to do something vulnerable. In the comments below, write just one word that describes what your authentic self wants that you've been denying. Don't explain it, don't justify it, don't qualify it. Just name it. Sometimes naming what we want is the bravest thing we can do. And maybe, just maybe, someone else needs to see that they're not alone in wanting it too. Jung taught that the goal isn't to abandon our strength, but to make it conscious. To choose it when it serves us, rather than be compelled by it out of unconscious fear. To be strong when strength is what's needed, and vulnerable when vulnerability is what's called for. But first, we have to learn the hardest lesson of all, that needing care doesn't make us weak, it makes us human. And being fully human, Jung would say, is the most courageous thing we can be. Freedom doesn't come from always being strong. Freedom comes from having the courage to admit when you're tired. Sarah's healing didn't happen overnight. It began with one radical act of authenticity. She called her best friend, Lisa, and said 7 words that shattered decades of conditioning. "I'm not okay, and I need help." The silence on the other end of the phone lasted forever. Sarah's heart was pounding. She'd never, in 26 years of friendship, asked Lisa for help. She'd always been the helper, the listener, the problem solver. She was terrified Lisa would be annoyed or overwhelmed or wouldn't know what to do with this new version of Sarah. Instead, Lisa started crying. "Thank God," she whispered. "I've been waiting 20 years for you to let me love you back." That conversation changed everything. Not because Lisa solved Sarah's problems, but because Sarah finally experienced what it felt like to be truly seen. Not for what she could do, but for who she was, including the parts that were struggling. Jung understood that true strength isn't the absence of vulnerability. It's the integration of vulnerability. It's knowing when to be the rock and when to let yourself be held. It's being strong enough to be weak when that's what the moment calls for. This is what Jung called the integrated self. Not the person who never breaks, but the person who breaks consciously. Who cries when crying is needed. Who rests when rest is required. Who asks for help when help would serve them. Who says no when no is the right answer. You don't have to prove that you're okay. Listen to me. No one is really okay all the time, and pretending to be okay all the time isn't strength. It's a prison of your own making. Real strength is saying, "I carried this as long as I could, and now I need to set it down." Real strength is recognizing that your worth isn't determined by how much you can bear. Real strength is knowing that asking for support doesn't diminish you. It completes you. Sarah began practicing what she came to call conscious weakness. She started telling people when she was tired instead of pushing through exhaustion. She began saying no to requests that depleted her, even when people seemed disappointed. She asked friends how they were doing. And then, revolutionary act, she shared how she was doing too. The most radical thing she did? She took a week off work, not because she was sick, not because there was an emergency, but because she wanted to remember who she was when she wasn't helping anyone else. That week was terrifying and beautiful. The first 2 days, Sarah didn't know what to do with herself. She kept reaching for her phone to check on others, kept looking for problems to solve. But slowly, other things began to emerge. She remembered she used to love painting watercolors. She spent an afternoon in an art supply store, just touching brushes and feeling colors. She took a bath in the middle of the day without feeling guilty. She read a novel, something she hadn't done in years. She cried, not from sadness, but from relief at finally being alone with herself. Here's what Jung would want you to know. Your authentic self isn't weak. Your authentic self includes your strength and your vulnerability, your capability and your need for care, your ability to give and your need to receive. The goal isn't to stop being helpful or caring. It's to make those choices consciously, from a place of wholeness rather than compulsion. Tonight, before you go to sleep, try this. Put your hand on your heart and say, "Thank you for carrying so much for so long. You don't have to earn love by being strong. You can rest now." Feel what comes up. Let whatever emotions arise simply be there, without trying to fix them or understand them. This is your authentic self, saying hello. And here's another practice. Sarah found life-changing. Once a day, ask yourself, what do I need right now? Not what others need from you, not what you should need, but what you actually need. Rest, movement, connection, solitude, creative expression. Just ask and listen. Your body and soul know the answer. Carl Jung wrote, "To confront a person with his shadow is to show him his own light." Your shadow, all those parts of you that need care, that feel uncertain, that crave rest, that have their own dreams and desires, isn't your weakness. It's the other half of your wholeness. When you embrace these parts, you don't become weak. They become real. You become integrated. You become free. The light Jung speaks of isn't the harsh spotlight of performance. It's the warm glow of authenticity, of being fully yourself, of allowing all parts of you to exist and be loved. Today, Sarah still works as a nurse. She still cares deeply about her patients and gives excellent care. But she also takes her breaks. She leaves work at work. She has boundaries that protect her energy and her heart. She's still the person her friends call when they need support. But now, she also calls them when she needs support. She still helps her family navigate challenges, but she also lets them know when she's struggling and needs their help too. She found what Jung promised we all could find. Not the performance of strength, but the reality of wholeness. The strong act that's been quietly breaking you isn't strength at all. It's the act of pretending you don't need what every human being needs: care, understanding, rest, and the freedom to be beautifully, imperfectly human. True strength is letting that mask fall. True courage is showing up as you are, not as you think you should be. True freedom is knowing that you are worthy of love not because of what you do for others, but because of who you are. Sarah learned to ask the question that changed everything. What if being strong enough to be vulnerable is the most courageous thing I can do? The answer transformed her life. She discovered that vulnerability isn't the opposite of strength. It's the birthplace of authentic strength. That rest isn't laziness. It's wisdom. That needing others isn't weakness. It's the essence of being human. Your journey toward authentic strength, toward integrated wholeness, toward the freedom to be real. It starts with one simple recognition. You are not broken. You are breaking free. Free from the exhausting performance of constant strength. Free from the prison of everyone else's expectations. Free to be who you actually are, not who you think you should be. If this message reached you, if you felt recognized in Sarah's story, if Jung's wisdom touched something real in you, if you're ready to stop pretending and start living, comment finally below. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. Your authentic self has been waiting for this moment of recognition. And remember, The world doesn't need another person pretending to be invincible. The world needs you, real and whole, and beautifully human. Until next time, welcome home to yourself.